Tonight on Bridge City News, Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder introduced a new private members bill on Parliament Hill calling for more transparency from credit card companies. It was a close vote, but Calgary City Council decided to move forward with a bid to try and win the 2026 Winter Olympics and Paralympics. And Lethbridge residents spoke at City Hall today, giving their input as to where money is needed most when it comes to city services. Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. There needs to be more transparency when it comes to credit card companies. That's according to Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder. Harder introduced a private members bill yesterday in the House of Commons called the Credit Card Fairness Act. Ms. Harder joins me now via Skype from Ottawa. So the foundation of this bill is really about fairness and looking out for consumers when it comes to credit card companies?
The data shows us that last year, in 2017, Canadians actually paid $544 just on interest payments. They paid $544 more than the previous year, just on interest. And so, that just goes to show that Canadians are taking on more debt. They're using their credit cards more often. And the reason is because they're just wanting to make ends meet. It's actually not for lavish purchases. A lot of it's to pay the bills. It's to put food on the table. It's for the daily necessities. And so I wanted to do something that would help serve Canadians well in that area.
Tell our viewers about some of the measures aimed at ending so-called deceptive banking practices.
One of the changes will make it so that when an individual pays off their credit card bill, their payment has to go towards the highest interest rate loan first. So right now that's not the case. So banks can decide where that money is going to go, where that payment is going to be allocated. And often banks will choose to put it towards something of a lower interest rate so that they can continue making money off of the loan at a higher interest rate. So this would change that on behalf of the consumer. Another change within this bill would make it so that the consumer has to be able to see the amount of interest that they've paid over the last 12 months. So that would appear at the top of every bill. So they would have a really good idea of how much principal they're paying versus how much interest they're paying.
Many MPs I've chatted with in the past say it is very rare that a private members bill gets passed. What needs to happen for yours to pass?
Great question. As a private members bill, of course, it's me as an individual that is bringing this bill forward. I have the backing of my Conservative colleagues. I'm reaching across the aisle and working with Liberals as well to try to bring as many as possible on side. At the end of the day, I serve as one out of 338 members in the House of Commons. So I have a lot of work ahead of me in order to garner their support going forward. If the government is in support of these changes, if they too want to advocate on behalf of the consumer and make sure that they're empowered to make the informed decisions with regards to credit card use, then the government will vote in favor.
Now, speaking of finances, what has the reaction been like on the Hill in regards to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau having Stats Canada tap into 500,000 Canadians' bank accounts for personal financial information each year beginning in 2019?
When we talk about deceptive banking practices, it's not just the banks. Apparently, it's our current government as well that's being deceptive with Canadians. And so they are taking information from 500,000 Canadians and, they're going into every nook and cranny of their financial history, whether it's bill payments or bank account balances or e-transfers to their child in college. This government is looking into those things, collecting a database and retaining that information for future use. It's certainly not fair to Canadians. It's certainly not ethically or morally right. And so as Conservatives, we're certainly calling them to account on this and expecting the government to answer.
Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder, thanks again for joining me today from Ottawa.
Yeah, no problem.
After nearly killing the Olympic bid, Calgary City Council voted yesterday to keep its 2026 Winter Olympic bid alive following 7 hours of heated debate. The vote was close at 8-7. The next step is a November 13th plebiscite where Calgarians will vote on whether or not the city should host the Games. One of the contentious issues was how much money was already spent on the plebiscite, which is around $773,000. The cost of the 2026 Winter Olympics and Paralympics will be around $5 billion, with the money coming from Ottawa, the province, the IOC, and Calgary taxpayers. The return on investment is reported to be around $4.4 billion. Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman says our city could also potentially see some economic spin-off from Calgary hosting the 2026 Winter Games.
There could be some, and what we'd want to do is make sure that there's opportunities for exhibition games for hockey. We're not sure, maybe people would want to come here and practice curling. There's a number of sports that could be affected, winter sports. So we'll do what we could to help Calgary and make sure that our citizens are exposed to Olympic athletes.
Calgary, Stockholm, and a joint Italian bid from Milan Cortina will present their cases to the International Olympic Committee in January of next year. The winner will be chosen by the IOC in June. Firefighters must go through extensive training, and part of that process includes professional driver training. Lethbridge's newest firefighters were taken through a moderate speed track using ambulances and fire trucks. The track prepared the recruits for emergency responses on city streets. They were also tested on perception and reaction abilities and how to properly maneuver through a situation. One of the new recruits talked about the importance of being alert while on the road.
The spatial awareness, the ambulance is obviously a little bit bigger than a truck or a car, a little wider, and then making the decisions on the fly with a little bit bigger vehicle definitely adds a different side to driving.
Now, speaking of fire safety, the City of Lethbridge Fire and Emergency Services is encouraging us to check our smoke detectors and the batteries as we set our clocks back 1 hour this weekend. The fire department says safety should be our #1 priority. So far this year, smoke and fire has caused around $1 million in damage in Lethbridge. The numbers are in as to how many Alberta firefighters helped battle blazes in both BC and the U.S. Pacific Northwest this year. It turns out our province sent out 681 firefighters out of province, along with various firefighting aircraft. So far in 2018, firefighters had to deal with almost 1,300 wildfires, which is actually down from the yearly average of just over 1,400. There were also close to 60,000 hectares of land burned. Firefighters are reminding Albertans to take care with any burning during the winter months. If you see a wildfire, report it right away by calling 310-FIRE or 310-3473. Lethbridge Police served the community today in a different way than normal. Constable Kara Hagan doubled as a barista today during Coffee with a Cop hosted by the Stoketown Cafe and Cure.
Nothing but the best for our Lethbridge citizens. Kind of just set up and make ourselves available with some delicious coffee, and we're just here to answer questions from community members. So the owner, Glenn, he advertised about every time we're coming. It's right at the first week of the month, and we advertise on our Facebook pages as well.
I spent 14 years as a policeman in Calgary, and so yeah, I'm a big supporter of the police and a lot of the initiatives that they're trying to do.
Who had the French fries? I could have guessed. And the salad for yourself, and we have some ketchup coming that apparently I forgot. All right, enjoy.
Coffee with a Cop is a monthly initiative by the Lethbridge Police Service in partnership with Stoketown. Lethbridge's joint Christmas Hope campaign kicked off today. As Josie Foster reports, the collaboration has grown exponentially in size.
5 local charities are joining forces to make this holiday season a bit brighter for those in need.
We've always been 3, but to have the 2 new agencies join us has been it's a blessing for the city, for Lethbridge and surrounding area. We can actually cover everyone that's in need within Lethbridge and the surrounding areas and be able to provide them with the much needed items for Christmas.
Right now we have registered lists for McGrath, Tabor, Pincher Creek, Coaldale, Coalbanks, and we have businesses in those areas that are supporting Angel Tree. So it isn't like we're going to be taking Lethbridge dollars and moving it into those areas. We actually have those areas supported by individuals and corporations.
Both local food banks and the Salvation Army have come together for 12 years now. Lethbridge Family Services and My City Care are joining the team this year to serve approximately 2,700 adults and 4,000 children.
Last year we worked with them just by through our relationships, and we just decided that this year we wanted to kind of streamline things, make sure that we were being efficient and being responsible with the resources that were given to us.
We have some incredible business partnerships, corporate partnerships. Christmas is just about that, so we're so happy to be a part of it.
Many hands make light work, and so it's nice to collaborate. It is a wonderful thing for our families too, because they're able to get more and they're able to get a complete Christmas in an easier process where they're being served by one food bank and one toy agency. It streamlines things for us, and it is wonderful for our donors as well, because they can give to one and support all.
For a full list of agency contact information and progress on the collection, you can visit christmashope.ca. For Bridge City News, I'm Josie Foster.
The misfortune of rural crime on the prairies is having an upside. As Gerard Lampo reports, communities are learning how to support one another through tough times.
The crime wave we've talked about out in this area, we've been hit quite a bit with theft along with a lot of the neighbors.
Apart from trying to produce food, rural Albertans have struggled with criminals visiting their property. Gart George says the Marwayne area has been rallying.
We had a set of individuals in our yard at about 4 in the morning one day, and we had a group chat, and the first truck was there 5 minutes after I called for help. And we never caught those ones. And then just last week, good friends down the road, we actually caught 6 of them.
The community has been taking responsibility to look out for each other.
With the group chat and just being neighbors helping neighbors. And I think we're starting to stick together. Everyone's kind of had it out here. It's been enough. It's not really the RCMP's fault. They're really understaffed. I feel for those people when they come out. You know, the best they can get there is, 20, 30 minutes before they're even on your doorstep, right? People are mad at the cops, but I don't think it's their fault. They're doing a good job.
The police remain vigilant, and even with the harvest rush on, George admits to being pulled over in the early hours of the morning. It helps to know your officers.
Well, we've had meetings. We're working with the police officers. It's pretty sad that we know the officers personally and by name.
If anything, he points out that neighbors and communities need to support each other.
Everyone's just got to stick together, get to know your cops, get to know the legal system, what the rules are.
Here's a follow-up to a story we had for you recently on our social media. 18-year-old Peyton Many-Shots has turned himself into Calgary police. The Brooks man was wanted in connection with assaulting a Lethbridge police officer. This stems from an out-of-control house party on 21st Street South, where police encountered close to 150 intoxicated teens. The house sustained about $4,000 in damage. Many-Shots will appear in Lethbridge Court on November 20th. Seniors wanting to know more about reducing the risk of falling are invited to an event being put on by Alberta Health Services and the Injury Prevention Centre. The Don't Fall Behind event takes place November 6th from 2 till 4:30 p.m. at the Medicine Hat Library. Activities include learning how to properly use walking poles and proper exercises for strengthening. Falls are the leading cause of injury for older adults in Alberta. 1 in 3 seniors will experience a fall this year. According to the AHS, that accounts for more than 29,000 emergency department visits annually. That equates to 79 emergency hospital visits in our province each and every day. Sheila Walsh is the co-host of Life Today with James and Betty Robison. She's also written over 50 books. Her latest is called It's Okay Not to Be Okay. Sheila says when you're at your lowest, that's when you should reach up to your highest.
It really took my life falling apart at 35, and I ended up going from co-hosting a program called the 700 Club in the morning, and by that evening I was in the locked ward of a psychiatric hospital. But it actually turned out to be one of God's greatest gifts to me, because that was at my lowest that I suddenly discovered how much I was loved by God.
Catch my full interview with Sheila discussing the best ways of dealing with life's biggest struggles coming up in the second half of our show. We need better time management. That's according to Michael Bell, author of the book Managing God's Time. Mr. Bell says as a society, we need to prioritize our days a little better.
We need to stop and plan. The important usually requires reflection and planning. We don't like to stop, think, and reflect because we have something called a to-do list, which drives us. And our to-do list actually is our enemy.
Catch my entire interview with Mr. Michael Bell, an adjunct professor of business administration at Briarcrest College, coming up after business news. Democrats in the U.S. are heading into next Tuesday's high-stakes midterm with optimism. Many are feeling optimistic about retaking the House of Representatives and control of Congress. Political pundits say the midterm elections tie in with the fate of Donald Trump's presidency.
With the clock ticking down to the crucial midterm elections, candidates across the country are fighting to fire up their base.
You guys are voting. You're knocking on doors. You're donating.
This is the call to action. Yes. Are you ready?
And push that energy to the polls.
I am here to ask you to vote.
At stake, control of Congress and the future of Donald Trump's presidency.
If you want to stop the radical Democrat mob from taking control of Congress, then you need to go out today, ideally, and vote
After crushing defeats in 2016, Democrats head into Tuesday's election feeling cautiously optimistic, while the chances for the blue wave that many had predicted has diminished and Republicans are favored to keep control of the Senate. Democrats insist they have a winning chance of taking back the House.
We've been looking at sort of the possibility of a Democratic House, Republican Senate for a while now. That could still maybe get upset on Election Day, but I think that's where sort of the smart money is. The Democratic electorate is engaged. Independents seem to be breaking for the Democrats.
And when it comes to the House, the math favors Democrats as well. Of the 70 or so House seats considered most competitive, more than 60 are held by Republicans. Democrats only need a net gain of 23 seats to retake the majority. Still, Republicans believe momentum, fueled in part by the Brett Kavanaugh Supreme Court fight and almost daily campaign stops by Trump, is on their side.
There is a true blue wave out there. It's not a wall of water, it's ahead. Waving goodbye.
Democrats point to their strong edge in fundraising and the anti-Trump fury of female suburban voters as powerful weapons in their fight to flip Republican-held seats.
I don't like the incumbent president, and I want him to get a message that the way he's running that office is not okay.
If Democrats are able to reclaim the House, it will be the first time they've controlled the chamber since 2011. And there'll be a thorn in Trump's presidency, blocking much of his agenda and potentially opening a wide array of investigations.
The Democrats would have the full investigatory powers of the House, which I'm sure they would unleash on the White House in a way to try to damage the president in advance of the 2020 presidential race.
Though he's not on the ballot, Tuesday's midterms are widely seen as a referendum on Trump's 2 years in office.
And we are going to win, win, win. And we are going to keep winning.
But history is not on his side. The president's party almost always suffers losses in midterm elections. In fact, in the 39 midterms since the Civil War, there have only been 3 in which the party in power didn't lose seats in the House. Kelly Daschle, Associated Press.
A story we've been following closely on BCN is the acquittal of Pakistani Christian Aja Bibi. She was on death row for blasphemy since 2010. After 8 years, she is finally being released from prison and solitary confinement. The Way's founder and president, Dr. Michael Youssef, calls for urgent prayer for the Pakistani government to act justly for other persecuted Christians in that country.
Well, Pakistan is a place that most of the persecution doesn't necessarily come from the top echelon of the government, but it's coming from the people on the ground. And they demonstrated against the judge who acquitted her. And the same thing in the Middle East. It's the same thing. The governments, and I've met with some of the heads of states in the Middle East, they really don't want to persecute Christians. But there's so many people on the grounds, in the villages, in the small towns, who are basically want on a drop of a hat. They want to burn a church or kill a Christian and destroy this and do this. So the forces of evil is there, live and well. And we need to pray for the leaders that they would have wisdom in order to know how to deal with those forces of evil in their cultures, in their societies. We need to pray for the Pakistani government. We need to pray for the Egyptian government and the Saudi government and the Gulf government. So we need to be praying for the leaders that God will give them wisdom so that they can be fair and even-handed with their citizens.
Prayer is certainly a powerful tool, isn't it? Well, if you've been praying for moisture, your prayers may finally be answered. I'll have complete weather details coming up shortly. Mainly overcast today with light rain off and on. Tonight, good chance of showers with a low near 3. Tomorrow, more rain is in the forecast with a high near 13 expected. The rain clouds will move out on Saturday, bringing sunshine and a high of 9. The clouds return Sunday with a high near 10. Monday, a chance of flurries developing with a high of only 3 degrees. Tuesday, mainly cloudy with a high again near 3. Looking at the almanac, the average high for this time of year is 9 degrees with an average low of -4. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1947 at 21 degrees, and the record low was -27 in 1984. Sunrise was at 8:20, sunset at 6:10. Let's have a look at the national forecast for tomorrow. Vancouver had a rainfall warning today. Tomorrow, showers again with a high near 13. Victoria will also have rain and a high near 15. Calgary will have rain mixed with snow and a high of only 5. Edmonton will also have snow and +1. Regina will have light flurries and a high of 3. Saskatoon will have light snow and +1. Winnipeg will also get some snow and a high near 2. Periods of rain in the forecast for Toronto tomorrow and a high of 7. Ottawa will also receive some shower activity and a high near 6. Montreal will have rain or drizzle and a high near 8 degrees. Over the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick will be rainy and 8. Halifax, Nova Scotia will have rain but considerably warmer at 16. Charlottetown, PEI will have showers and 15. And in St. John's, Newfoundland, a good chance of showers and a high near 7 is expected. A biannual gathering for local women in business took place today in Lethbridge at the Coast Hotel.
There are not a lot of things around our area that are specifically geared just towards women, so we really specifically wanted this conference to be a chance for women to learn from each other, talk about some situations that may be just unique to women's circumstances as well.
The conference ended with a networking time for business women to interact with other local entrepreneurs. Calgary-based Encana says it has an agreement in place to purchase Newfield Exploration worth about $5.5 billion. The deal would make Encana one of the largest shale oil producers in North America. Once the acquisition is complete, Encana shareholders will own 63.5% of the combined company, and Newfield shareholders will have 36.5%. Encana also announced today it plans to raise its dividend by 25% and increase its share buyback program to $1.5 billion. Farm Credit Canada says the long-term potential to grow agricultural exports won't be derailed by today's uncertain trade environment. The FCC says farmers are facing price volatility now, but prices will average out over time. The group's chief agricultural economist says when that happens, exports will flourish. Canada has ranked as the world's largest exporter of agriculture commodities since 2011. The FCC says even though the country has a solid trading relationship with the US, China, and Japan, developing new markets can help diversify trade performance when price disruptions occur. Many would agree that the Lethbridge real estate market is a little soft right now. John Pasalis with Realosophy Realty says unhappy home sellers or buyers may find it a little difficult to break their contract with their realtors. He says before you sign, ask to add clauses to allow you to cancel the contract.
One big step is certainly interview 2 to 3 people, get a better feel for them, their style, and just your fit with yourself and your own style. But also coming up and thinking about ways to cancel it. So, one way if you're working with a buyer's agent, for example, is to ensure that you have the rights to cancel that relationship at any time if you're not happy, no strings attached. Because a lot of agents will lock their clients in and not let them cancel. Some agents will ask that of their clients up front when they start working together. For those who don't, the balance will almost always basically get their clients to sign one when they're making an offer. And these are, I think, the more vulnerable ones, because these are the buyers who don't really know what they're signing. It's just like one more document, a bunch of paperwork with their offer. And the challenge sometimes happens is if they don't win that house, they just don't realize they just locked into working with somebody for a year.
Now here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, Lethbridge MP Rachel Harder introduced a private member's bill on Parliament Hill yesterday, holding credit card companies more accountable and transparent. The bill is called the Credit Card Fairness Act. Harder is trying to get MPs from all parties to support her bill. When you see news happening, drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's top stories, check out our full newscast online at bridgecitynews.ca. Up next, I chat with Sheila Walsh, who is co-host of Life Today with James and Betty Robinson, and recently wrote a book called It's Okay Not to Be Okay, The Best Ways in Dealing with Life's Failures and Struggles. Watch that interview next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News Community Calendar. The Miners' Days Historical Association of Colehurst is holding its annual Christmas craft sale on Saturday, November 3rd from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. at the Colehurst Community Center. Come out and see unique gift ideas from over 40 vendors. You're invited to the Knox United Church Tabor Annual Fall Supper, being held Sunday, November 4th at the Tabor Community Center from 4:30 to 6:30 p.m., featuring delicious roast beef and cabbage rolls. Tickets are $15 for adults, $6 for youth ages 6 to 12, and those 5 and under are free. Tickets are available at the church office or at the door. Takeout will be available. Celebrate Recovery is a Christ-centered recovery program for any hurt, hang-up, and habit. This group meets Friday nights at the Park Meadows Baptist Church. The evening begins at 6 p.m. with supper and follows with an opportunity to share and connect with others in small groups. For more information, visit celebraterecovery.ca. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
You know, we live in a society that often seems fixated on perfection. We battle to measure up and to be better than the next person. But is this really the best way to live? Today's guest is Sheila Walsh. She is co-host of Life Today with James and Betty Robison and best-selling author. She's written over 50 books, and her latest book is called It's Okay Not to Be Okay. Sheila, welcome to Bridge City News.
Thanks, it's good to be with you.
Now, you say this book is a little bit different from the other books you've written. How so?
So many of the other books I've written, I've been very transparent about my own personal struggles. I've talked about being hospitalized for clinical depression. I've talked about the challenges of mental illness in the church and how we did not address that very well. And a lot of women wrote and said, thank you for talking about these things. Now I know I'm not alone. But what now? Now I feel like I'm stuck or I'm struggling. So this book is much more of a kind of a manual of how to move forward when you feel as if you're just stuck.
So who do you think the book is specifically written for? Those people who feel like they're stuck?
Well, you know, it's interesting because I think out of the 8 steps in the book, I think most of us would find ourselves somewhere in there, whether we're dealing with disappointment or fear or feeling out of control. I think most of us would find ourselves in those pages.
Now, you jumped into the deep end with this book, sharing a lot of your own failures and struggles. Can you share a bit with our viewers a little more about your own anxiety and depression and some of your struggles?
You know, interestingly enough, about 3 years ago, I had terrible back issues. And I was going from this apparent wide open door into working with James and Betty Robison. I had a full speaking schedule. And suddenly it looked as if I was going to be bedridden. They couldn't get the pain to move. I could hardly walk. And I suddenly realized how much of my identity as a believer was still tied up in what I do as opposed to who I am. And you know, you would think by this stage, I gave my life to Christ when I was 11. I'm now 62. You would think by this stage, I would have learned that who I am in Christ is what matters, not what I do for him. But I had to really walk through a deep valley of thinking, if my future is now the 4 walls of this home, Christ will still be with me.
Yeah, that's scriptural, right? You know, walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I feel no evil, for thou art with me. Now, what would you say to someone watching who's going through a life storm right now? What's the very first step to take?
First of all, I would want to say to you that you are not alone, that God is with you. In fact, Psalm 34, David said, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. And I love Romans chapter 8. It's one of my favorites in the New Testament. It begins with no condemnation, but it ends with no separation. No matter what we are going through, we're not separated from God's love, but dare to have a gut level, unedited conversation with God. Tell him what you think. Tell him how you're feeling.
You know, Sheila, there are an awful lot of us who struggle with not measuring up. Maybe not measuring up for a husband, our wives, our bosses, you know, maybe to our parents if we're children. We don't feel that we're really good enough. So how can we really change our mindset on that?
You know, I spent the first probably 30 years of my life trying to be good enough for God. My father committed suicide when I was 5, and he tried to kill me before he killed himself. So I grew up thinking, what is wrong with me? If your own dad could seem to hate you, then don't let anybody else get close. And it really took my life falling apart at 35. And I ended up going from co-hosting a program called the 700 Club in the morning. And by that evening, I was in the locked ward of a psychiatric hospital. But it actually turned out to be one of God's greatest gifts to me, because that was at my lowest I suddenly discovered how much I was loved by God.
What would you say to someone who wonders, does being okay with your imperfections give us a license to stop trying to improve?
That's an interesting question. It's kind of a catch-22. It's like grace, you know, the grace of God. So many people think I'm not teaching that to my kids because then they think they can get away with anything. But to me, it's not about that. It's about a love relationship. The more you fall in love with Jesus, somebody asked me last night, at the end of reading your book, what's your greatest prayer? And it would be that people would fall more in love with Jesus. Because the more we fall in love with him, it's not that we feel we have to do things a certain way. It's that we want to because we've been set free.
And you know, maybe that's a big part of it as well, because God is perfect. Jesus is the only perfect human being that ever walked on the face of the earth. So maybe sometimes even as Christians, we struggle to reach that kind of perfection that Christ had when he walked on this earth.
Well, I used to pursue perfection, and now I pursue Christ, who is perfect. That's why it is okay not to be okay, because Christ has made us okay with God.
And a lot of us struggle with fear and anxiety. Sheila, fear of failure is a big one in particular. How can we really overcome this?
You know, I think one of the greatest lessons I learned from my friend Elizabeth Elliot, you know, whose husband was killed by the Auca Indians many, many years ago. And she and several of the other wives and sisters were left in Ecuador wondering, do we go home? Do we stay? And she was so afraid of what if we tried to go in and the same thing happens to us? And one of her best friends said this to her, Elizabeth, do it afraid. So often we wait till we're not afraid anymore. But I think if you know you're called by God, commit your way to him and step through that fear. If you fall flat in your face, there's nothing in the Bible that says you can't fail. But I think it'd be sad to get to the end of your life and think you never tried.
And learn from those failures at the same time, correct?
Absolutely true.
Now, a lot of our fears are based on childhood experiences from the past. Now, any advice on we can really deal with this and not live in the past?
I think it's important to face the past. Sometimes people are defined by the past, so that's who they are, and they can't move on. Other people don't want to even think about it. But what I've discovered in my own life is facing what happened, but then bringing all of that into the light and the life of Christ, and realizing that I am not what happened to me, I am a child of God.
Now, we all have disappointments in life that we fail sometimes. We learn from those failures, and then we can move on. But some people just can't move on. So what do you say to those people that just want to sit in a pity party and just camp out there and they're happy there? I don't know why, but a lot of times people are happy right there.
You know, it's interesting. I just got back not so long ago from Phnom Penh, Cambodia, where I was working with girls trapped in sex trafficking. And I saw the worst, poorest area right beside a huge Buddhist temple. And I asked the priest, you know, do you ever consider taking some of that money and helping some of these desperately poor people? And he said, the poor don't deserve to be helped. If they will take the little they have and give it to the priests, then perhaps next time they'll be born in a better place. It's called karma. Grace is the opposite of karma. We get what we do not deserve. And if you sit there and saying, I'll never change, I'll never be good enough, it's almost as if you're saying what Christ did on the cross was not enough. When Christ said, it is finished, he said, bill paid in full.
I wonder how they can sleep at night seeing that much poverty right next door and not doing anything to help their fellow man. That's mind-boggling, isn't it?
Devastating. It's devastating.
How did you feel when you saw that personally?
Heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking. But I realized that so many other religions, I mean, grace is unique to Christianity, and so many other religions, there was another group I met who cut themselves and put their blood on the altar. We are the only ones who have a God who bled for us.
Now, you're right about our tendencies to try and control things and people, but in reality, we can't control everything, Sheila. So how does a person simply let go and give it to God?
You know, it's interesting. The first verse I learned as a child was Psalm 46, verse 10, be still and know that I am God. Now, I wrestled with that as a teenager until I went to seminary and began to study. The Hebrew root of be still actually means let go. Let go and know that I am God. Let go of trying to control what you can't control. And to me, it comes down to believing. Do you believe that God is good? Do you believe that God is for you? Do you believe that no matter how things appear, God is still on the throne? And when you believe that, then by his grace, you can let go.
Now, what about when you expect things to go a certain way and then bang, they turn out completely the opposite of what you've been expecting? How do we learn to properly respond to these kind of disappointments?
You know, I think sometimes when things don't go the way we think they should, we wonder what we did wrong. Or we wonder, does God see us? What happened? But if you look at the Old Testament, if you look at like a young boy, Joseph, who knew at 17 he had been called and gifted, but it was another at least 20 years before he was able to see that dream come true, that I would just say to anyone who's in a place of feeling disappointed right now, it's not that God doesn't love you. God's timing is perfect. He is not too early and he is not too late.
How about those of us who feel in our hearts sometimes that we want to blame God? What do you say to those people?
You know what? I saw that with my own son. My father-in-law lived with us from when he was 79 to 82, and my son just loved it. And the night that William died, Christian and I, my son and I, were the only two home, and we followed the ambulance to the hospital. And I noticed that after William's funeral, my son, he pushed our cat off the sofa, which is something he'd never done. So we went for a long walk, and I said to him, Christian, what's wrong, darling? Are you angry? And he said, yes, I'm angry. You said that God would always answer prayer, and he didn't, so I'm angry with him. And I told my son what I would say to anyone. It's okay to be angry with God. To the level you're willing to be honest with God is an indication of how much you actually trust him.
And that's how much he knows and loves us too. I mean, he expects us to show those kinds of emotions. After all, he made us. Now, you're right that we should celebrate our scars. Most people would likely say, let's cover them up. Why should we actually celebrate those scars, Sheila?
We all have different scars. Some of them are external and some of them are internal, like mine was, hiding the fact that I had a diagnosis of clinical depression. But then I began to see that God tells his story in scars. Christ could have risen from the tomb and left the marks of crucifixion there, but he didn't. He took them with him. The only marks, the only scars in heaven will be the scars of Christ. And if he's not ashamed of his, why should you and I be ashamed of ours?
So what do you say to someone who's thinking of, you know what, I got to get out of this terrible black hole that I'm in right now. I don't know Christ, I don't know God, but at the same time I hear about all these Christians who are persecuted. It's a tough road, picking up your cross and following me as Jesus says. I don't want to go down that road. I'm already having hard enough time in my life as it is. So what do you say to somebody like that who's reaching and searching?
First of all, I would say this is not about religion. We need religion like we need a hole in the head. What we're talking about is relationship with God. And the thing I want you to know is whether you even acknowledge his existence or not, he loves you and he cares about you. So why don't you just try a little experiment and say, hey, God, you know what? If you were real, would you show yourself to me? Maybe just pick up a Bible and read a couple of verses and just be open to the possibility that there's one who made you and who loves you.
So what advice could you give to a parent whose child may be struggling with trying to be perfect?
Yeah, our son was like that. My son, Christian, was a perfectionist. If he didn't get an A in every single thing, he was crazy. And so when it came to his 16th birthday, I said to him, okay, you've had A's all the way through. So I know you want a car, but if there's no B's, there's no C's. And my husband was horrified. What do you mean he has to get a B? But it was my way of trying to say, you know, Christian, you get to be who you are. You know, you don't have to be perfect. You get to fall down. And I think as parents, we can model that for our children. You know, if I've been wrong in something, I'll say to my son, you know what, babe, I thought that was the right thing, but I think I was wrong. Be honest with your children in an appropriate way and let them know that they get to be themselves.
Do you think it's important as well, Sheila, to recognize an effort that a child makes? And maybe they didn't get an A on that test, but maybe they got a B minus, but they put all their heart and soul into it. So take them out for a Sunday to celebrate anyway.
Absolutely. I think that's brilliant advice. Because for some children, an A is an easy thing. For other children to get a B minus, they poured everything they had into that. So celebrate your children where they're at. Don't compare them to other kids and say, well, you're not doing as well in this. Every child is made it individually by God. Learn to celebrate their little triumphs.
Sheila Walsh, author of many books, over 50 of them, including the latest one called It's Okay Not to Be Okay. Thanks a lot for joining me today from Dallas, Texas.
Thanks.
I have a real personal question to ask you. Have you noticed that time really does fly by, and not just when you're having fun? It seems like our society is getting busier and busier these days, and the pressure can sometimes get to us. Joining me now to talk about time management is Michael Bell, author of Managing God's Time and adjunct professor of business administration at Briarcrest College in Niagara-on-the-Lake. Welcome back to BCN, Michael.
Great to be here. Good to be here. And the society is not getting busier. People are crowding their lives with things most of which don't matter. And we've forgotten one thing: time is fixed. You cannot manage a fixed commodity. You have to manage what's going on in this fixed time. God has given us 24 hours. Wow! We have 168 hours a week. What we need to do is to look at how we spend and invest the time that He has given us.
You know, a lot of people say, you're right. A lot of people at the office say, I'm too busy. I'm sorry, I can't. I'm too busy. Now, is that true, or just maybe we don't really want to make the time, maybe for an individual or a project?
The challenge we have is we don't differentiate between what's important and what's urgent. The urgent gets us. The cell phone rings, we grab it. We want a cup of coffee, we go for it. As opposed to say, we need to stop and plan. The important usually requires reflection and planning. We don't like to stop, think, and reflect because we have something called a to-do list, which drives us. And our to-do list actually is our enemy. We should get rid of the to-do list and start to work with a day timer, with time against everything we need to do, and have a particular goal for each item. That's what we need to do.
What about the honey-do list? Honey, I need you to do this, I need you to do that. That's pretty important too. You can ask any wife or any husband.
I know that. I've got my own as well. But the key is to sit down with honey and say, honey, what is most important for you? And honey, these are the things I have to do. How can we prioritize it? You know the problem we have? We think that we should balance our lives. Don't imbalance your life. Not everything has equal importance. So God is number one and honey is number two. So when we work with priorities, then we're able to do everything in God's fixed time.
Now, how about young parents? A lot of times they have young children in hockey, ballet, and sometimes they, or maybe even the grandparents are taking the grandkids, they get a little burnt out. We say put God, others, and then you, but sometimes they put the kids first.
It comes back to priorities. But you know what most of us do? Most people have a to-do list. Every day, we should have a list of what we are not going to do. We should consciously get up to say, these are the things I would like to do. What are the things I'm not going to do? Because there's too much time that we have. We actually have too much time and we crowd things into it. If we stopped and we said, today, there's 8 hours or 10 hours, we can only do so much. We have to go back to prioritizing. But here's the deal. Have you ever stopped and done a time inventory? Have you ever looked at how you spend your time in each day? If each person did that for a weekday and a weekend day, I promise you, each person will find 2 hours of discretionary time that they can do more in. That's a promise to you and your audience. You do a list of everything that you do, and then you set a goal for what is it you should be doing instead of what you have been doing.
So let's say if your husband or wife or just whomever demands more of your time, maybe your boss as well, when do you say no? Is it when it starts to negatively impact your health? When do you say enough's enough?
We have to learn to say no. Many times the boss or the wife said something, we said no. No. Instead of saying no, we show what we have on our plate and ask, how can what you're saying fit into what I have to do? So for example, sometimes I would work maybe 24 hours in a day, actually 24 hours through the night. But I'd go to my wife and I'd say, these are the things I have to do, honey. What are some of the things you would like to do? And we sit down jointly and we look at priorities. I know I have said priorities many times. It comes back to priorities. The other thing that we need to do is identify time wasters. Each of us know that we have time wasters. There are certain things. For example, we go on the internet, we go on Facebook, Instagram, etc. Never do that without a timer. When you're doing these things, you say, I'm going to go for half an hour, and you put half an hour. At the end, I'm done. We need to focus on what I call working for time versus working for task. When we work for task, we just keep working. When we work for time, where we have time wasters, then we stop at 15, 20, 35 minutes, and so on. It's a mindset change.
You know what? You're right, Michael, because many times I'll go onto social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever the case is, and I'm on there. I don't even realize for 2 hours, and then I'm watching YouTube music videos another 2.5 hours, and my evening is shot after I get home. It's like, what happened? It's 11:30. You know, so I guess to be effective with our time, we should really set those goals out for ourselves, shouldn't we? Like you said.
Yes, we need to get a principle which says every time I'm going to do something, I set a goal. What's the goal? The goal is the destination, what I want to do. Then I do a plan. What's the plan? The steps required to do the goal. And then I review as I go along. Sadly, we take things on without thinking. So somebody says, can you do this? Oh, yeah. And then we stop and we keep going, and it's going for too long. So it's what I would call, we have a can, do, review, reversed. Can, do, review, revert process where it's focused on the goal. What am I trying to do? Why am I doing it? How am I going to do it? And what are the steps that I need to do to achieve the goal?
Now, we've all been at meetings, whether they're family meetings or office meetings, and sometimes these meetings can be a waste of time. So how can we make those meetings more effective and more efficient when it comes to our time?
You know, this is something I teach my students. The Wall Street Journal, in a recent survey, found that 80% of meetings waste time. And there's one thing to do to make those meetings more effective: have an agenda. How many times have you been to a meeting where they say, we're going to discuss A, B, C, D? But there's another thing to do. When you have a meeting with an agenda, you put the time for each agenda item and an owner for each agenda item, and then you have a follow-up. Generally, meetings literally are designed to waste time. Instead of doing something, oh, let's just have a meeting and we'll adjourn. No, it should be focused. There should be a convener, there should be an agenda, there should be a time for each item, and most of all, we should have a buffer between each agenda item. We shouldn't have 8 to 8:30, 8:30. We should have 8 to 8:30, 10 minutes, review, and so on. But it's easy to have a good, effective meeting with an agenda.
So how important is it to have downtime to re-energize, revitalize yourself to get ready to take on the challenges or chores of the same day or the next day?
I think it's probably the most important aspect of managing your priorities. I don't believe in managing time. You can. The most important is to have 8 hours sleep, or whatever you should try to understand your body. I need 8 hours of sleep. Sorry, I need to be in the bed for 8 hours, closing my eyes. I also have a Sabbath rest. I try to have at least 5 hours every week where I am down. I'm not thinking about work. I'm reading, doing things where my brain isn't activated normally. I think that's crucial. Downtime. I also believe that we should break each day up. Instead of working continuously for 2 hours, for example, for me, every 45 minutes, I get up, I take a deep breath, I look through the window, may go for a 2-minute walk or so on. When I'm teaching my students, every 45 minutes, I ask them to stand and just walk around for a minute. It's crucial to have a break and downtime. In my book, I have something I call my time, where you have to look at yourself, think about your body, look about how you're breathing. Are you sweating? Are you stressed? And so on.
Now, you use something called one touch. Can you describe what that is?
Yes, the one touch principle, to me, is really important. Many times, for example, you go into your email and you see something and you say, oh, I'll look at it tomorrow. They look at it tomorrow. And you look at the good thing about tomorrow, it's always coming. My goal is every time I'm going to do something, I try to look at it and deal with it once. If I get an email and I believe I can handle it in 1 minute, I'll handle it. If I can't, I decide when and put it aside to a specific date, and then it comes back and I'll deal with it. So the purpose of one touch is to minimize the steps to do everything in everyday activities. Simple things. For example, if I take this jacket off, I take it off a particular hanger. And when I return, I put it back on that hanger instead of putting it on a bed or a chair. because I touch it once and return it once. It saves a lot of time. If you were to do a time inventory and focus on one touch and also selective neglect, choosing what you're not going to do, it's amazing how much you find that you have what you would call more time, but what I would say you become more effective in available time.
Now, many people say, I try to spend as much quality time with loved ones as possible. You say that's a bit of a myth. Can you explain?
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Quality time is an executive or somebody on a fast track in a job that they love. It's a guilt relieving way to say, I just don't want to spend too much time. My son, when he was 18, confronted me and said, Dad, you're not here for me because you're spending these quality time. I need quantity time. I think it's important we set aside time for our spouse. For example, for me, on a Thursday afternoon, it's my date night with my wife. And if somebody wants me, I say I'm dead. If you need to get in touch with me, what would you do if I was dead? Go do that, because my wife is important. If I'm spending specific time praying, etc., the phone never bothers me. For example, we need to learn to turn off the phone. How many people can listen to the phone ring and do nothing? These are simple things that we need to recognize. And these are things that will free up time for us to spend quantity time with our loved ones and, of course, with the Lord.
I was going to ask you that. So how important is that, spending quality time with God, meditating on His Word and in prayer, and just being still and knowing that He is God?
I think it's so important. For me personally, I like to start my day just listening. I think I talk too much. I want to be listening. I want to be reading the Word and reflecting and listening to what do I take from it? What does God have for me in this? I think it's an affront to the Lord to say we are, quote, too busy to spend time with Him. My personal view is we can never be too busy, because what I've found is when you start your day with the Lord, and what I do, I take my calendar and I say, Lord, this is what I would like to do today. Would you please show me the things I should do? And I'm consciously listening, hearing to that. And I promise you, when you start to do this and you literally turn over that life and acknowledge His time, your day goes very differently, very productively.
Now, another piece of advice you have is to review your day before heading home from work. And why is that?
Because you want to learn. I think we should be on a learning path. So at the end of the day, having spent some time with the Lord in the morning, we would have said, okay, Lord, these are things I'd like to do. And we sense the Lord is saying, this is what you should do. At the end of the day, the idea is, what have I done? Why did I do what I did? Why did I not do certain things I should have done? And how can I change and become more effective in available time? Let me just repeat. It's the effectiveness in available time. We don't have any more time than 24 hours. The issue is not managing time. It's managing our effectiveness in available time, which never changes. The good news is time is fixed. So the only variable is you and I. So at the end of the day, we need to look at this and see, how can I improve for tomorrow, and go to the Lord and listen to His advice in that area.
Michael Bell, author of Managing God's Time and adjunct professor of business administration at Briarcrest College in Niagara-on-the-Lake. Thanks a lot for joining me today.
Thank you. It's been a joy. Have a great evening.
And I had a good time. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great night.